Okay, welcome everybody. Let me go ahead and get right into the solar news. There's actually quite a lot of it, I guess because we've had a 2-week hiatus here. But Bruce had sent me through an article on the tariff, the solar tariff. So the Biden administration has extended the solar tariff for 4 years. I've ranted a little bit in the past about how I think tariffs are not necessarily a good idea. Fortunately, even though they've extended it for 4 years, they've kind of gutted it to make it somewhat meaningless. They exempted bifacial solar panels again. Remember, those were exempted before. Now they're exempted again. And apparently, utility scale systems use bifacial panels to a very large extent. So I suspect because of this being exempted, that's now lowered the cost by 15% of all bifacial. So we're probably going to see residential starting to use bifacial quite a lot because it's cost competitive. It adds a little bit of efficiency. They did drop the rate of the tariff from 18% to 15%. They also increased the import allowance on solar cells from 2.5 gigawatts to 5 gigawatts. To put that in perspective, basically what that means is you can import the cells with no tariff up to 5 gigawatts of cells to be then reassembled here in the United States as panels. Well, last year they imported 2.7 gigawatts. So they pushed the limit up above, well and above whatever we imported before. So effectively, there's no tariff on cells, just on panels. So a lot of the Asian manufacturers of panels have simply set up assembly plants here in the United States. So they're importing their cells from China. They're just assembling them here in the US.
Is there any cell production in the US? Just out of curiosity. Is there any cell production in the US?
Not a lot. Not a lot of cell production in the US. Now, the tariffs have resulted in panel manufacturing in the US tripling in the last 4 years. So whether that's a good thing, a bad thing, an indifferent thing, I don't know. These are mostly Asian-owned plants. Don't know if that makes a difference anyway. I personally feel like the distinction between American made and international, we're a global economy. It's all a bit of a distinction without a difference in my mind.
We're a global economy until they decide to turn off the spigot.
Yeah, that's true. There is in this legislation a pathway for duty-free imports between Canada and Mexico. Although currently the United States gets well less than 1% of all their solar stuff from Canada or Mexico. So that again is kind of a non-issue, but you know, a nod to our neighbors. Another item, community solar. There's a new report by Wood Mackenzie that it's growing faster than expected. And community solar, in case you don't recall, is when you don't actually own the system, but you own a portion of a community system. So somebody puts in a large, 15-acre array and you own 5 panels, 10 panels, 30 panels, whatever, out of that array. There is a government goal of increasing, the Department of Energy wants to increase community solar by 700% by 2025. We're heading to exceed that at the moment, largely due to some very favorable legislation in New Jersey, New York, Illinois, and Colorado. So those are the areas that are leading community solar. The California Public Utility Commission had announced some proposed changes to their net metering process, which would have, they're calling it NEM, or I guess net metering something 3.0. But what they were going to do is increase the grid access fees and decrease the amount of money paid to folks who were selling back power to the grid. There was a big pushback because, for instance, Wood Mackenzie estimated that would cut the solar installation in California market in half. And there was some other studies that found that the payback period, if that were put in effect, would change from 5 to 6 years payback for a typical system to 14 to 15 year payback for a typical system. So these were pretty dramatic. As a result, the CPUC has announced they're indefinitely suspending their plans. So apparently they have decided to drop the whole idea, at least for the foreseeable future. So that's interesting. Solar chargers, I was hoping that Tony might be on the call here today, because this is about EV station chargers. But apparently something I hadn't considered in the past, when you've got a solar charging station, you're actually charging for electricity. So are you subject to the utility regulations in the state when you're running a vehicle charging station? So the way they've gotten around this in the past is they say, well, we're not charging by the kilowatt hour, we're charging by the minute. So that makes it not a utility. Well, again, that may be a distinction without a difference, but now customers are getting savvy enough to saying, I don't care how many minutes you're charging for me, how much power are you giving me? How much energy am I getting? So they want to be billed by the kilowatt hour. So the Wisconsin legislature said, okay, we'll refine this to say that you can charge by the kilowatt hour, but only electricity bought from the utilities can be sold through your electric vehicle chargers, which means essentially you can't set up your own solar array to charge, to use. So it gives a monopoly to the utilities for electric vehicle charging. And that's caused a whole bunch of wailing and gnashing of teeth. But that's going to be a national conversation. I'm sure it will be, because now we're getting into the whole world of what is a utility. Talked about virtual utilities. We talked about now EV charging. Is that a utility? Is it not? What if we have other energy services? Will that be a utility? Will it not be a utility? Who knows? So that's a whole nother ball of wax that we have to see how that's going to pan out. But that's currently in the beginning stages. And
Jay,
speaking,
was that just in Wisconsin? I'm just curious.
Currently.
That was just, okay.
Yeah, currently
Sure.
it's just a bill in Wisconsin, but it's a national conversation, obviously. So we're going to have to deal with that probably in a state-by-state basis.
There have been a number of rulings lately at the IRS for utilities. A lot of them are setting up solar structure or solar arrays, and then selling them off and buying the power back at market. And I believe they're keeping part of the ownership, but a lot of the decisions are whether or not they qualify for certain special benefits for being a utility. And that I don't think they want to, because they said that these utilities that are regulated utilities are setting up market-based subsidiary, so that the solar stuff is all market. They're selling that electricity at market, so they're taking that out of the utilities regulated, I don't know what you call it, function, or
Yeah.
They have a special set of rules all around how you tax a regulated utility. But it was all keyed on whether or not it was a cost recovery or whether it was market-based.
I remember back in the breakup of the Bell system, there was a lot of issues around, is this the regulated side of the market or the deregulated side of the market? Because as you say, the rules are different depending on how you're classified. So I suspect, again, in the electric industry, we're going to see that, because up until recently, it's been pretty straightforward. You are a regulated utility or you're a consumer of electricity. Now that's getting mixed up, because the same companies, you can be a consumer and a producer, you can be a producer and a consumer, you can be a customer, you can
distributor,
you can have contracts. So in fact, I was just talking to a customer where I was saying that the utilities are beginning to separate themselves out into at least 3 distinct businesses. One is generation, one is transmission, and one is distribution. And a company could do all three, could do any of the three, or none of the three. You could simply be an aggregator of services. So it'll be interesting how that all plays out. And now, of course, we're getting into the regulated versus the deregulated. And I see Tony just joined us. And I had mentioned in the last thing there, Tony, about Wisconsin bill about is an EV charging station a utility or not? And if you charge by the minute or charge by the kilowatt hour. And that's going to be a conversation that's going to be interesting as we move forward. Wisconsin is maybe the Florida of the North when it comes to legislators, but we'll see if they do something that is precedent setting or maybe reverse precedent setting. And there is another EV charging station thing here. I saw Emporia Energy is hooking up with BREK Electronics to make a bidirectional charger that the article says works with all brands of EVs, but then when I looked at it a little closer, it was basically, it uses, what's the plug that's non-Tesla? What's that one, Tony?
CCS, CCS, or CHAdeMO. Those are the only two other options.
Oh, well, this is a level 2 charging station, so it's not
J1772.
It's not one of the CHAdeMOs or anything.
Yeah.
They're looking at having it available 2023 at a cost of about $1,500. That's their current state. I was looking through their information to see if that included any kind of inverter or if that's just simply the plug. Not any information I could find on that. It seems $1,500 would be a little bit cheap if it does the whole inversion process.
Yeah, it's probably like their other ones are just glorified extension cords.
Yeah,
they'll take it AC in. I'm assuming if it's level 2, AC in, it'll hit the onboard charger in the vehicle, which will flip it to DC to charge the battery, and then to flip it out, there has to be some conversion to be able to go bidirectional.
Yeah.
But
and
$1,500 is going to be light.
it would have to have some sort of transfer switch as well. So there's a lot of other equipment that's going to have to be added in to make that. And has there been a consensus on the vehicle to grid standard? Because I wonder how you can make one that you say is universally applicable without there being a universal standard to which you're building this component.
Optimistic, forward-looking statements.
I would guess. Yeah, so I guess that's a PR piece without any substance behind it, is maybe, they're saying they're hoping to do this in a year and a half if all the planets align and, there is a market for it. So anyway, but it's at least companies are starting to talk about providing this kind of thing as if it were a real world thing. And eventually it will be a real world thing where you can go out and simply buy a bidirectional charging station to hook into your home. Then Indiana bill, I had gotten some feedback saying that they were doing away with net metering in Indiana. A customer had told me this. I hadn't heard that, but then I saw this, which I think is where they were getting it, is they recently passed legislation changing the net metering law in Indiana from a 1-to-1. So for every kilowatt hour you send back, you get paid full retail, to changing that to 125% of wholesale. So they were, instead of me sending it back, let's say I'm paying them 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Now they're only going to pay me, instead of 12 cents, they're going to pay me 125% of wholesale. Well, a judge recently interpreted this law to say it only applies to that which is in excess of what you consume that month. So there's a 1-to-1 payback for everything you're consuming. And then if you over generate, they will pay you 125% of wholesale, which is very similar to what I currently have with my utility, where I can get my bill to zero, but if I overproduce, they'll pay me basically wholesale, which doesn't gut their system. It's a lot different than them paying 5 cents a kilowatt hour versus 12 for everything. So if you're in Indiana and you're worrying about it, apparently don't worry about it. Well, worry a little bit. Yeah, Bob, you have a question or are you leaving? You're muted there. There you
I'm
go.
staying.
Okay.
And, how much do they pay you? What is 125% of what?
Yeah, well, there's probably some creative accounting there, which is how Don makes his living. But it's whatever. I guess.
What do you want it to be?
Yeah, it's whatever they claim is their cost for power, their generation cost. So if you look on their bill, there would be a generating cost, there would be a transmission cost, a wholesale cost, a cost for a lawsuit because they violated the law, a cost for paying for the Spanish-American War, a cost for whatever, you know. So it's whatever 125% of their per kilowatt hour generated.
Only the telephone company gets the Spanish-American War excise tax.
I know, and that is a real.
It is a real one.
It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
real tax. Yeah, that's
Oh,
still
yeah.
on your
Oh,
phone
yeah.
bill. So that's pretty amazing.
So I want to put that down on my sheet on a dollar amount on what customers can expect.
Well, it's
But
going to be different depending on what utility as well, because they're going to have different generating costs as well. So basically for Indiana, you can say, okay, up to what you consume, you're going to get a 1-to-1. You know, you can zero out your bill that way. If you overproduce, now you're only going to get 125% of whatever they consider their generation costs are. That affects it because in the past, you might have been able to carry forward a balance. And so in the summer, overproduce, in the winter, underproduce. So it will cost them something, but not as much as what was initially anticipated.
Well, in Chicago, we don't mess around with that. First of all, we charge 24 to 26 cents per kilowatt hour, which is like double the national average.
Yeah.
And then last month, I paid more in fees than I did in the cost for the kilowatt hours.
Yeah, for access, for grid access and things like that.
I don't even look at what they call it. All I do is see that it's a fee.
Uh-huh.
And it's $27 a month right now.
Yeah,
So-
one of the fees that you see often on electric bills that I don't like is there's a renewable energy, fee. And it's basically paying for the fact that they're having to comply with whatever their state renewable portfolio standard is. And, so they want to make sure you understand that the idea of renewables costing you something, that's
They have
kind
a
of.
cost recovery model. They're supposed to make a fixed return, so whatever their costs are, that can't be free.
Uh-huh. Or they could just install more solar and reduce the cost of their operations. So
If they put enough more in, it'll go over a larger amount. That's right. So it'll be on average less.
yep. And then there's the Ohio Senate just passed a bill that limits homeowners associations from restricting solar within the development. Yeah, that's a good thing. In fact, they cited more than 200 cases during this hearing of homeowners associations stopping people from installing solar because they don't like it. And it can be fairly capricious, fairly arbitrary. I remember one of the students, Bob, you might remember his name, up in Illinois. Anyway, he was having a fight with his homeowners association. And it was, what was it?
His name was Jack, wasn't it?
Jack? Okay. Well, and the main reason he was having a fight is because he used to be on the board and the guy who was currently president hated him. So that's why he was going to stop him from having solar. So, And Illinois had a law saying they couldn't stop you from putting solar on your roof, but he was putting in a ground mounted system, so they were going to stop him.
And he won. And he won.
Yeah, he ended up winning, but only because they didn't file the paperwork within the proper limited time frame. So that became an issue. So we're seeing more and more states putting in these homeowner association legislation to restrict homeowner associations from stopping you from putting it in, which is a good thing. Okay, now Eric had asked that I go into some SRECs, but before I go into that process, does anybody have anything they wanted to bring up this time? Yeah, Bob, you've got something, and Bill, I see.
Okay, did you get my email with the ROI?
Yeah, I got the return on investment. I haven't looked at it yet, but so I don't really have any feedback for you on that yet. But you're just trying to figure out a good way, a spreadsheet you can create to give a return on investment estimate.
Well, I have this nightmare that I have, that I do my due diligence and I get this calculator all done, and then I stand up in front of 30 people at the library and I go through my PowerPoint and I go through this, and then at that point one or two guys stand up who are smarter than I am and annihilate me on my numbers in front of everybody. So
Sure.
that's my nightmare.
No, I can sympathize, and
So my request is-
fortunately Don won't be in the audience, so you'll probably get away with it. But yeah, a lot of the things are so, with return on investment, it's like, do you include opportunity costs, time value of money? How do you deal with all of that stuff? So I'll take a look at it, but maybe we can run it past Don as well.
My request is spend 5-10 minutes showing it to the group here and let me get annihilated right off the bat.
Okay. All right, why don't I schedule that for next week? We'll bring it up and take some shots at it. And as you say, we can see, because that's one of the things people always ask when you go out to sell solar. It's like, what's the payback period? I was just talking to some people yesterday, in fact, a big farm up in Northwest Ohio, and they're just wondering, okay, if I invest in this, what's my percent return? And I'm like, probably better than a CD. It's like, well, how good is that? So I'm just throwing out some stuff without any kind of, if I could say that a typical return is between 15 and 18%, that's a lot different than me just saying, better than a CD.
I think that's probably high.
Probably so, but I don't know. It might not be. If you've got a 4 or 5 year return on your investment and it's a 25-year asset, I don't know.
Yeah.
What does that relate to? Especially when you add in 50% grant money and stuff like that on rural businesses.
Yeah.
So
once you put that in there, you can get a good return. You're right.
Yeah.
If you're just buying it like a normal person, not so much. But if you have like all the grant money you've talked about in the past, I think there are a lot of opportunities out there.
Yeah.
Hey, could you share that with me too before we look at it next week?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I've got it from Bob, and I can share it if I can, Bob, if it's okay to send it to Bruce and maybe to Don as well.
Yeah.
We can, and Eric, you want to see it too? Now I'm going to have to make notes here. So, all right. Yeah, Bill, you had something to add to that?
Well, yeah, I
Not
just
to that.
comments. Number one, I visited a solar farm under construction southwest of Houston, an hour drive, 500 megawatts. It was a great experience. There were about 30 people, and they served us lunch and showed us essentially the array, the substation, and the inverters on the farm. And not only that, this company called the EPC is Rosendin. It is a big union contractor, and they got the contract apparently to put in a 600 megawatt farm in the same location that's being put in by the French oil and gas company, Total Energy. And I might mention that the farm I did visit was being put in by Tokyo Energy or Tokyo something or other, which is in the top 10 companies worldwide that generate power. I'm not real clear on the specifics. That's one comment, and we look forward to a tour of the second farm real soon. I don't know what, I know they are, on the first farm, they are using Jinko bifacial panels for the reasons you outlined. However, I presume supply chain issues have kicked in and they've delayed completion for 6 or 8 months because of panel availability. The second comment is actually I'm doing an install at a glider port here in Houston, helping with that, and I'm using it's standing seam roof. It's called S5 standing seam, and I'm going to turn my camera around. That's what it looks like. Wait, okay, you see that? This is it's kind of a pain in, it's $7 a shot, which is pretty bad. And there are alternatives. And you can see from this that the angle, this is where it attaches to the roof on these lower surfaces. And I was
You're a
wondering
little
whether
off center there.
Oh, I'm
There you
sorry.
go.
I was wondering whether anybody had any experience using that clamp. Expensive, overkill, but necessary. That's my second item. The third item, I'm proceeding with my conversion of the 20-foot container, and I'm using a GrowWatt charger inverter, which takes solar input. It takes input from the grid or a generator to charge the batteries. And I wondered whether anyone has any experience with that particular unit. GrowWatt.
GrowWatt?
Yes, sir.
No. Eric, you're still muted there, Eric.
I did 7 of those GrowWatt inverters, 10 kilowatt in Tampa, actually in Plant City. But they were the grid utility interactive. They were not, they didn't have standalone capabilities.
Okay.
So far, so good. They seem to work pretty stable. The customer, the customer had trouble getting them connected to the internet. So he's still not monitoring them on the internet, but since it's on his property, he's fine with just walking up there some once in a while and look if they're producing properly. So
Were these 240 volt units?
240 volt, 10 kilowatt. Yes.
Interesting.
They were
Okay.
fed by about 12 kilowatt DC, something like that.
Okay.
And they're on a ground array that is maybe about 15-degree tilt south. And I haven't seen them being pushed to the limit yet. I think they've never been over 9 kilowatt production, something like that.
Cool.
So it's 120% oversizing, and no, it's not pushing them over. But what we noticed is 2 shut-off switches, 30 amp. What is it? 30 amp? No, it must be 60 amp. 60 amp shut-off switches went bad, burned up. I don't know why. We don't know. They shouldn't.
These are breakers?
The type that you use for like an air conditioner to where you pull out a copper bridge. It's not fused. It's just a.
Oh, this is a lockable disconnect.
And they're not lockable. It's at the inverter just to shut them, just to disconnect AC at the inverter because it's a ground array, ground mount, and 2 of those 60 amp disconnects, not a manual disconnect lockable and all that. It's just a regular what you would install at a air conditioner to shut it off. 2 of them went bad, and we don't know why, but it might be the switches that they were cheap. Because they were rated 60 amp, and I think they're putting out 10 kilowatt. I don't know what they're putting out. You can do the math, maybe 40 or something.
Yeah, 40, 45 amps, it sounds like.
Yeah. So that's the only problem we had. So an inverter went out for a couple of, I guess, days or so until he noticed, because he's not monitoring it. because he couldn't connect he had trouble connecting them to the Wi-Fi or something. It's a Chinese inverter and the installation manual or something. He couldn't follow it. I mean, I did the design, but I didn't install it.
Okay, Eric, did you have a comment on that inverter?
Not on the inverter, but the standing seam clamps. My son Sawyer had worked at an installer for a while, for about a year, and he was telling me about them. He said when they clamp down, they actually puncture into the sides, but it seals. He said they seem to be very strong. So he was satisfied with the design of that.
I've seen those standing seam, not those particularly, but my concern is basically you're locking onto the roofing, not into the rafter, right? So you're dependent 100% on that roofing not pulling up in a big storm. You know, I that always just worried me about hooking into the seam instead of hooking into the rafter. So
Well, that's the
obviously
beauty
they're
of the metal.
engineered, but you know, that would worry me.
I think that maybe on the same kind of general topic, I have a question. When I look at the clamps that I got when I put the last array I had in, I noticed they said that they expected you to go out there every year and check the check the connection. On the ground mounted array I've got, I could probably do that, but does anybody in real life, I mean, I don't see people jumping up on their roofs once a year or paying somebody. I'm just curious if anybody actually does it or has heard of anybody doing that.
Yeah, I see the same thing in most of the equipment manufacturers, and in my textbook, it even says you should go out and check the torque specifications every year, and
Okay.
you know, but I don't think people do unless.
Is that
there's a
all
problem.
legalese just to make sure that you can say you told them to do it before they fall off, or what?
Probably. It's a good idea. It would be a good idea. But
Okay.
whether people really do it, I recommend to students who want to get into a maintenance contracting program to put that in with their service. Like, I'll come and clean the snow. I'll come and
Okay.
deal with, I'll check once a year, I'll check all the connections and all the torque specifications. I'll monitor, you know, and then you can set up a monthly billing kind of situation if you want to just be, that's something corporations I think would be interested in, but homeowners probably, you know, unless something falls off, then they'll go up and check. But
Well, it's like the furnace guy who now all the furnace companies are starting to sell you a service where they come out, you know, twice a year, and you know, for $300, they'll make sure you have a happy home.
yeah, in theory, as long as they're still in business. I had an interesting thing I just heard about, and I thought I'd share it before I get into the SRECs thing. I was listening to a podcast about three-phase electric, which when I mentioned this to my wife, she said I needed to get a life. But it was all about the history of three-phase electricity, and it was quite fascinating actually, and how this all developed and the like. But it explained why some countries use 50 hertz and some countries use 60 hertz, and why some countries use 50 and 60 hertz. And it really all comes down to the early days of AC electricity and the three-phase generating system. And there's a dispute. There's a German fella, I don't remember his name. It's like Dabrowski, but it was like Dumar Dabrowski, or I know I'm butchering it. But there are many claims that he's the one who actually invented three-phase electric, that Tesla patented two-phase electric and then sort of threw three-phase in, you know, in the same patent. So he had the American rights. This German company had the European rights, and it became a battle between the German company. I think it was a three-letter initial, like AEG or something, and General Electric. So basically, every company that General Electric installed the system, they did it at 60 hertz because that's the system Tesla wanted. And the German company, every country that they installed the system, they did it at 50 hertz because that's the way their system was. And now 120 years later, we're still living with the legacy of two different engineers who didn't talk to each other and standardize what they were doing. So it really just came down to two people. One said, I like 60, one said, I like 50. And that's the way we're at it in the world. So
What does Europe run at now? Is it 50 or 60?
yeah, mostly 50, mostly
Is it?
50.
Okay.
Japan is half and half because GE did some of the system and this German company did some of the system. So they have part of the country is at 50 hertz, part at 60 hertz. But apparently when they first started this, it was like at 130 hertz or something. So they kept, it was all to get the efficiency of the system working. So I don't think there's much difference between 50 and 60, except that they're not compatible. So just found that interesting, that it really reinforces once again, when somebody says, why do we do things the way we do it? It's because that's the way we do it. You know, that's the only reason we're at 50 or we're at 60 hertz because that's the way we are.
Isn't that RPM of the generator determines that?
It has more to do. I don't want to get in. I don't think it's RPM so simply. I think it has something to do with poles versus windings and something like that. But I don't know enough to speak well on that. But yeah, it's just the way they did their systems. It's cycles per second, obviously, is what we're talking about with hertz. How many sine waves per second, whether it's 50 or 60 of them.
I just looked, Jay. It turns out the German company was an Edison company too. That probably also had something to do with it.
Was it an Edison company? Huh.
It said it's descended from an Edison company.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, okay, so let's talk about SRECs. Now, I think most of us on this call are familiar with it, but not everybody who watches this on YouTube or whatever. An SREC is a solar renewable energy certificate. It is where the person who owns the system can be paid by a utility to claim the right that part of their energy generation has been from renewable sources. This stems from the fact that many states, in fact, 38 states in our great nation, have renewable portfolio standards where they say, okay, utility, you must produce X percentage of your power from renewable. And the utility can either go out and install their own system, or they can buy power from an existing renewable system. Or the third thing is say, I'm not going to buy your power, but I'm going to buy the right to claim the fact that you're adding renewable power to the grid as part of my portfolio. So that's basically what a REC is, what an SREC is. And it can be quite profitable for somebody in some jurisdictions to sell their RECs, but they still keep their electricity. So it's like a carbon credit, you know, so it has value. Currently, there are only 6 states and the District of Columbia that have an active REC marketplace. Those states are New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. So all of those states, yeah, Bob?
Illinois now has it.
Yeah, but it's not really a REC thing. It has to do with your block thing. And I'm going to ignore Illinois because they don't count in any of this as far as what I'm going to discuss, because it's a whole separate system. You got to go in through, you can't really, let's just ignore Illinois. Illinois is a problem. So, all right. So what is a REC currently selling for? In New Jersey, as of today, the market price is $234 a REC. Massachusetts, $287. Pennsylvania, $39. Maryland, $79.50. Washington, D.C., $407. Delaware, $30.25. And Ohio, $11.25. Yeah, which is up from about $2, which it used to be not too long ago. For that reason, my array in Ohio, I've never submitted to get paid for RECs. Now, a REC represents 1 megawatt hour of electricity that's been generated by your system. When I looked at my system, historically, since I first installed it, I've generated about 48 RECs. All right, 48 megawatt hours of electricity. They said that a standard 10 kW system will generate 12 RECs a year, if you want to just sort of throw that into your brain. So 1 a month for a 10 kW system. Okay, when I first installed mine, the RECs in Ohio were selling for about $200 a REC. But the week after I installed it, the state legislature passed a law that reduced the value to 0. So that was very helpful. So now, how do we go about selling RECs? Because it's a very complicated marketplace. Well, in the intervening years, there's a company called SRECtrade.com. So you can go online. It's SREC Trade.com. And that's where you can get the prices, the daily quotes. It's a marketplace that you can get daily quotes on that. But you can register with them to be a REC seller. I went through the process today. I'm going to go ahead and register mine because Eric had asked about this. So I figured, okay, because the fees used to be, it cost like $100 and some to register and all of that. Well, SRECtrade.com says they don't charge you anything until they sell your RECs. And then they charge you for systems up to 50 kW, they'll charge you a 7% commission and 2% transaction fee. So basically 9% of whatever they get, they're going to keep. And they're going to give you 91% of
So I
whatever
can
it
sell,
is.
if I'm in Pennsylvania, can I sell to Massachusetts?
No, almost all of these state laws require that the system be in the state that that they're dealing with. Washington, D.C., it didn't used to be that way. So a lot of people in states, even that didn't have a REC market, were selling to Washington, D.C. But they changed that. And so now the system's got to be within the district. So it's interesting to me politically that they keep referring to Washington, D.C. as a state all through this this website. So I'm like, oh, well, no problem then. That's already taken care of. Okay, so 9% of, right now I'm getting 100% of nothing. So I'm willing to pay these guys 9% of something if they do all the work. So I don't know, until I go through the process, if this is really what's going to happen. They did say there's a $2.50 minimum, on the transaction fee. And they did say that you can manage your trading as well. You can set it up to be automatic, or you can go in and manually control how your RECs are traded. I guess that would apply to bigger system managers where, timing and things like that might have an impact. There were a few things. It's not a really complicated process to register, but it's actually a lot of pages to fill in. And some of the information that I didn't have with me that I'm going to have to go back is when you do register, you're going to need to know if you've got a consumption meter that's associated with your system. Like I've got Enphase microinverters. Well, they wanted to know what's the number on the little Envoy meter. So I'm going to have to go home and look at that and get the number off of that. They wanted to know what my electric account number is with my utility, which I didn't have my bill with me. You're going to have to look up your online monitoring system number. So there's some details like that they're going to want to know. They did ask me, what kind of panels you use, what kind of inverters you use, how much did you pay for your system? I don't know what they're using that information for, but probably they sell information like everything else. But it seemed pretty straightforward. I haven't completed the process, so I can't tell you if it's as simple as it feels, at least at this point. But I'll try and feed back to you later how that works. So Eric, did that answer all of your questions about RECs or did you have more?
Yeah, I was kind of curious. how they were keeping track of what's being produced. Is this what's being produced, or is it what you're pushing to the grid, or what are they looking at? And it sounds like it's what you're producing.
Yeah, it is what you're producing, and they're getting that directly off your monitoring meter.
Okay.
And there is a thing that you have to click saying it's okay for them to link into your online monitoring system. So,
Okay. Yeah, that answered a lot of the questions that I had about it.
okay. Bob, do you have a question or are you leaving?
I'm sorry, I'm still staying.
You keep waving like that.
Oh, is there a protocol to waiving online?
There's actually a little button you can push, but nobody uses that on this call. So,
I see. In Illinois, SRECs, and there's another one, uses MRECs as a monitoring system. And the fees on MRECs is like about $50 that you have.
oh, really? So you've got to log into some sort of monitoring service?
Yes, and the SRECs uses a monitoring service to keep track of all of that.
Yeah, there is one other variation in this that I ran across. The state of Delaware, actually, they came up with a system where it's not a open market system for the purchase of RECs. It's like a sole source, only one company, like the major utility in Delaware, is allowed to buy RECs, and they have like an annual auction. So it's not as straightforward as the other states. So Tim, did you have something?
I was curious, what do you expect to get out of your system? I mean,
Well,
how do you get it? Do they send you a check?
Yeah, I think what they'll probably do is link into either my checking account or into my PayPal or whatever. That would be my guess. Yeah, if they're currently going at 11 and a quarter, and I generate about 10 RECs a year, so what, $100 maybe if I'm lucky.
In
That's why it
Illinois-
was never worth my time before to set it up. But if it's a pure commission thing, I'm fine for setting that up.
Is your $250 minimum fee per rec or per company, per year or something?
I think it's per transaction.
Okay.
So depending, I know in the past, and I haven't gone through this, but you could sell it on the spot market or you can have a long-term contract. So if I were to sell it at 5-year contract today, I suspect there wouldn't be another transaction for another 5 years or so.
Mhm.
But
In Illinois, they cut checks for 15 years of output in the future.
yeah, the Illinois market is very bizarre, complicated, but as you said, there's a certain amount of liability there too, because when they prepay you these RECs for 15 years, that has the assumption that you'll be producing at an estimated level for a period of 15 years. And if you don't, somebody's got to pay something back.
The owner has to pay it because they get all their information and they hold a certain amount of money up front. And in my case, they got my guy's credit card number so that if it doesn't produce what you're saying, they just take it right out of there unless the credit card is canceled.
Yeah. Yep. So hopefully it'll work. I mean, I know a lot of the articles I've seen have put a lot of faith in Illinois' system that it's going to really incentivize the industry, but it
Is this
seems overly
taxable?
complex to me.
Is it taxable?
Oh yeah, it's income for sure. It
It's
would be
income,
taxable.
okay.
It's income, but you get to recover your costs.
Oh, you mean,
You feel
well,
the depreciate, basically you'd be depreciating your system. So you probably have, I got a feeling that the depreciation from putting the system in is way over any income you're going to get.
oh yeah. Certainly in Ohio. But
Yeah.
if I were looking at Washington DC, $400 a rec and I'm getting 10 of them a year, I mean, that's $4,000 for a
That's fine.
system that maybe cost me for an 8 kW system in this market, you're looking about 20,000, fully installed before incentives. So, that's 5-year payback just through RECs. So
Yeah. How do we get in the DC market?
move to DC.
Move to DC?
It ain't worth it.
No, it's not. You're 100% correct.
Right. Okay, so anybody else have anything before we call it a day?
Tony, did you get my email?
No, Bob, I did not, but let me look at my spam. I've had overzealous spam inbox. I've had stuff from investors and other people making an initial splash go right to spam. So let me check thanks for letting me know, and let me check my spam box.
I'll resend it today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okey doke. All right, well, we'll see you guys next week, and one of the items on the agenda will be your return on investment thing, Bob. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Right.
I'm leaving now.